In Seneca's Letters from a Stoic, we gain a profound insight into human nature through an anecdote about a man named Crates. When Crates saw a young man walking alone, lost in thought, he asked what he was doing. Upon hearing the young man reply that he was talking to himself, Crates warned him, "Be careful, for you are talking to a bad person." This seemingly simple exchange carries a powerful lesson about the dangers of being alone with our thoughts, especially when our minds are unguarded and vulnerable. When people are experiencing anxiety, depression, or intense emotional distress, solitude can often exacerbate their inner turmoil. In isolation, there is no one to offer perspective, no external voice of reason to counteract the negative spiral that may form within their minds. It is in these solitary moments that harmful thoughts and destructive ideas can take root. Seneca warns that the senseless person, those who lack self-control and wisdom, should not be left alone, for it is during these times that the mind is most likely to indulge in harmful impulses. When left unchecked, our minds can become breeding grounds for negative thoughts and desires. In solitude, as Seneca describes, the mind is free from the fear of judgment or consequences. This freedom, while it could be used for introspection and growth, often leads to the surfacing of repressed emotions, lust, anger, and shameless desires that we keep hidden out of fear or shame in the presence of others. The mind dares to explore dangerous paths, emboldened by the absence of external scrutiny. This is why, according to Seneca, solitude is not advisable until we have done the necessary inner work. Until we have cultivated a disciplined mind, it is often better to withdraw into a crowd. Why? Because being in the presence of others provides an external check on our behavior. In a crowd, we are more aware of our actions. We are forced to observe social norms, and this helps rein in some of our worst impulses. When we are around others, we temper our words, our anger, our desires, not necessarily out of virtue, but because we don't want to face judgment or embarrassment. In this sense, being in a crowd can serve as a temporary guard against our own undisciplined mind. But Seneca doesn't advocate hiding in the crowd forever. The goal of Stoic philosophy is not to avoid solitude, but to prepare ourselves to face it with strength and confidence. It's about cultivating inner resilience so that when we are alone, we are not dominated by negative thoughts, shame, or anger. The true test of character is not how we behave when others are watching, but how we conduct ourselves when no one is there to judge us. To this end, Seneca suggests that we should appoint a guardian, a watcher over ourselves, an internal figure of authority to keep us accountable even when we are alone. He invokes Epicurus by quoting him, "Do everything as if Epicurus were watching us." The idea here is that by imagining a wise and virtuous person overseeing our actions, we can temper our impulses and guide our thoughts toward reason and virtue. This external presence, even if imagined, serves as a mental check against our baser instincts. But Seneca takes this concept even further. He argues that it's not just about avoiding bad behavior because someone might be watching. It's about cultivating a deeper sense of accountability to ourselves. Ideally, we should become the kind of person who does not need an external guardian, someone who acts rightly not out of fear of being caught, but out of an intrinsic sense of virtue. The goal, according to Seneca, is to develop self-respect so strong that we wouldn't dare betray our own values, even in solitude. This is a key point in Stoic philosophy, the notion that true virtue is not dependent on external validation, but arises from within. The Stoic strives to reach a point where their own conscience becomes their ultimate guide. In this state, they act with integrity, not because they are afraid of judgment from others, but because they have internalized their values so deeply that they want to live virtuously. Seneca puts it beautifully when he says, We should be engaged in making ourselves the sort of people in whose company we would not dare to sin. This process is gradual. At first, we may need the mental image of a wise figure like Epicurus or a Stoic sage to help guide us. But over time, as we practice self-awareness and self-discipline, we begin to cultivate an inner strength. We develop the ability to hold ourselves accountable, even when no one is watching. This is where true self-respect begins to take root, when we no longer need an external guard because we have become our own. When we reach this level of self-awareness, we can, as Seneca says, send away our attendant. We no longer need the mental crutch of imagining someone watching over us because we have become people who naturally act with virtue. In this state, solitude no longer presents a danger. Instead, it becomes an opportunity for self-reflection and growth. We can be alone with our thoughts without fear, because we have trained our minds to follow the path of reason and wisdom, even in the absence of external judgment. But this journey to self-mastery is not easy. As Seneca points out, solitude can be dangerous for those who have not yet cultivated a strong internal compass. Without a clear sense of purpose or virtue, the mind can quickly turn to indulgence, anger, or fear. That's why it's essential, particularly in the early stages of practicing Stoicism, to keep a close watch over our thoughts. By imagining the presence of a guardian or a virtuous figure, we remind ourselves of the importance of staying on the right path. When we stay on this path, we separate ourselves from the multitude. We become a different stamp from the multitude, as Seneca puts it. This means distancing ourselves from the common flaws that pervade society: fear, greed, anger, and a lack of self-control. It is not enough to simply withdraw from the external world. We must also master our internal world. We need to develop the kind of self-restraint and inner peace that makes us safe company, even for ourselves. Once we have made ourselves the sort of person in whose company we dare not sin, Seneca suggests we withdraw into solitude. At that point, solitude becomes not a risk, but a reward. It becomes a time for self-reflection, a chance to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world without distraction. When we have cultivated the virtues of self-control, tranquility, and wisdom, we can trust ourselves to be alone with our thoughts. Solitude in this context is not dangerous because we have trained our minds to act according to reason, not impulse. We have become our own guardian. Here, Seneca quotes Epicurus again. "The time when you should most of all withdraw into yourself is when you are forced to be in a crowd." This reinforces the idea that the time to retreat into solitude is when we are surrounded by the distractions and noise of the crowd. When we are forced to be in the company of others, that is when it is most important to withdraw into ourselves. Why? Because even in a crowd, we can still feel alone. Our minds can still be troubled by desires, fears, and anxieties that no amount of external company can resolve. The real challenge is to maintain inner calm and focus, even when the world around us is chaotic. This is where Stoic wisdom intersects with the practice of mindfulness. To be in a crowd yet remain internally centered is a skill that requires deep self-awareness. The Stoic doesn't retreat into solitude to escape the crowd, but to reconnect with their true self, the self that has been shaped and honed by virtue. When forced to be in the crowd, the Stoic mentally withdraws from the distractions of external noise and focuses on what truly matters: reason, virtue, and the cultivation of inner peace. Ultimately, Seneca teaches us that solitude is not inherently good or bad. It depends on the state of our mind. If we have not yet disciplined our thoughts and impulses, solitude can lead us down a dangerous path. But once we have cultivated self-restraint, tranquility, and virtue, solitude becomes a place of strength. It becomes a time to reconnect with our highest self, free from the distractions and temptations of the crowd. The goal is to reach a point where we no longer need to rely on the external presence of others to keep our behavior in check. Instead, we carry our own guardian within us, our trained mind, our refined sense of virtue. At that point, solitude becomes not a confrontation with the rascal within, but a peaceful retreat where we can engage in deep reflection and continue to grow as individuals. We become the kind of person who, whether in the crowd or in solitude, acts with integrity, wisdom, and calm. And that is the ultimate aim of Stoic practice, to reach a point where we live as if we are always being observed, not by others, but by our own higher selves.